Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories this hour. Ukraine says its air defences downed 137 drones, but a missile and 27 drones hit 9 locations as European officials met in Kiev for the Yes conference. The attack follows Russian drones entering Polish airspace, sparking NATO debate on security as leaders discuss shared defence and Ukraine's future in Europe. President Donald Trump tells alliance members to halt energy imports from Moscow and back major sanctions to force an end to the war in Ukraine. He also calls for NATO to consider group tariffs of 50 to 100% on China to limit its economic support for Russia. Medical staff say airstrikes left dozens dead, including children, as Israel targets high-rises it says are used by Hamas and orders residents to evacuate. Health officials report a family of 10 and footballer Mohamed Habibi among the dead, while hundreds of thousands remain in the city amid shortages. In her first public remarks, Charlie Kirk's wife says she will never let his legacy die, calling her grief a battle cry to the world. Suspect Tyler Robinson remains in custody after a 33-hour manhunt, facing charges including aggravated murder and felony firearm discharge. Huge crowds gather in central London for a far-right demonstration led by Tommy Robinson, with a heavy police presence and counter-protests staged by anti-racism campaigners. Flags, slogans and symbols fill the streets, including tributes to US activist Charlie Kirk, who was fatally shot earlier this week. Beijing condemns a joint sailing by HMS Richmond and USS Higgins as provocation, saying it undermines peace and stability in the region. London and Washington call the transit a routine operation, insisting it complies with international law and freedom of navigation. US envoys Adam Boehler and Zalmay Khalilzad meet Taliban Foreign Minister Amir Muttaqi in Kabul to discuss citizens held in each other's countries. The Taliban says both sides agreed to continue dialogue on bilateral issues, including the status of detainees. The IDF says a drone strike in Aratun targeted a Hezbollah member accused of rebuilding infrastructure in violation of a ceasefire deal. The strike comes amid ongoing cross-border tensions as Israel continues operations against Hezbollah networks in southern Lebanon. Now we start in Europe with our top story, where Ukrainian emergency services have released videos showing the aftermath of Russian drone attacks in the southern Mykolaiv region. According to the emergency services, the strikes started fires in 2 private houses and outbuildings before being extinguished by firefighters. This comes as Ukrainian media reported that Russia launched 164 drones and a ballistic missile overnight as top officials gathered in Kiev for the annual Yalta European Strategy Conference. According to the Ukrainian Air Force, the country's air defense systems successfully intercepted and downed 137 drones across various regions, including the north, south, east and center of Ukraine. Despite this, a missile and 27 drones struck 9 locations. The Air Force did not specify the exact locations hit, and no casualties were reported from the attacks. We are now joined by Major General Gigi Davidi. He is a global strategic defense expert and he joins us live from New Delhi. Major General Davidi, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. Pleasure as always. General, Russia launched 164 drones overnight. What does this scale of attack tell us about Moscow's drone warfare strategy?
Well, Thomas, currently, I would say the war that is going on in Ukraine is primarily the aerial war, and Russia is trying to target both civilian as well as military infrastructure, and it is primarily the aerial warfare that serves two purposes as far as President Putin is concerned. One is to keep the psychological pressure on Ukraine, and second is to cause damage both to the military and the civil infrastructure, especially the infrastructure of logistics, infrastructure which pertains to the energy. The point is that most of the drones and missiles are effectively countered by the air defense system of Ukraine, but some do penetrate, and largely, as you have reported as well, that the casualties are to the civilians and to the civilian infrastructure. But the point is that I don't think these strikes are actually making a major difference as far as the end result or the end dividends that you get from such strikes. They are continuing. Basically, I think Putin wants to keep the war going. He is in no mood to sit on the negotiation table or negotiate, because there is a delusion that Russia is winning the war, which exactly is not. So I think that these sort of strikes cause more civilian damage than any military gains, but the war is continuing, and we are witnessing primarily the drones and missile strikes from the Russian side. Thomas.
Now, Major General, do stay with us. We have further updates from the Ukraine-Russia conflict. In Kyiv, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky told leaders at the annual Yalta European Strategy Conference that Russia's recent eastern offensive has failed. He highlighted intense fighting in areas like Sumy, Novopavlivsk and Pavlovsk, but said Ukrainian forces have held the line. Zelensky pointed to the past 2 months of Russian attacks, saying they've made no real gains. His comments come as Ukrainian troops continue to defend key positions in the east, where battles remain fierce. Let's have a look at his statements.
На сході, і там зараз найскладніша ситуація. Були наступи на Сумському напрямку, Новопавлівському напрямку, на Покровському напрямку. На мій погляд, всі наступи, які були за останні 2 місяці, провалені Росією, і вони розбиті. Вони це чітко усвідомлюють.
Now we're once again joined by Major General Gigi Davidi. Major General, President Zelensky says Russia's eastern offensive has quote-unquote failed. Militarily speaking, do you agree with this assessment from the Ukrainian president?
Well, I fully agree with the assessment of Ukrainian president, because on the ground, Russia has not made any tangible gains. What's going on are the tactical battles, and Russians are paying a very heavy price, even to gain a few hundred yards on the ground. And I don't think that this meat grinder war or the highly attrition war is giving any dividend to the Russian side. Rather, they are paying a very heavy price and suffering very heavy casualties. And this is something like the trench warfare of World War I, where the two forces are locked almost eyeball to eyeball, and there's very little gains that either side is making. So therefore, I think President Zelensky is very right that on the ground, not much of gain have been made by Russians, while they have taken very heavy casualties. But I don't think that this is cost effective, because at the end of the day, you gain few hundred yards, but you pay a very heavy price, and that's not exactly the way the warfare or the war is fought. I think Russia is actually in a state of stalemate, and they're taking very heavy casualties. Once again, I say, perhaps President Putin is convinced that they're winning, but gaining few hundred yards at a very heavy cost, I don't think is the right kind of warfare any nation should indulge. So President Zelensky is quite right that on the ground there's stalemate, and Russian forces have not been able to make any tangible gains. Thomas.
Yes, Major General. Conversely, do you see risks for Ukraine if this battle does remain as fierce as it is right now with no decisive shifts in the war. Could this prolonged stalemate actually play into Russia's hands?
Well, exactly. The point is that when you fight for tangible victory or tangible gains. And that's not the case here because the Russian side is not making any tangible gains. And this is a state of stalemate. So I would again reiterate that perhaps President Putin is just keeping the war going, but not making any tangible gains either through the aerial warfare or warfare on the ground. And soon the winter will set in. Even these tactical battles will also further scale down. So I exactly don't know why Russia is continuing with these gains because perhaps they have a delusion that they will be able to make some tangible gains. But I don't think the front line is going to shift any significantly over a period of time because both sides appears to be evenly matched, and I don't think any decisive gains would be made by either side. This stalemate continues, but at the end of the day, you fight to make tangible gains or fight for victory, but this fight is only to keep the stalemate going further and further at no cost or no gains. Thomas.
Yes, thank you very much, Major General Gigi Davidi, for taking the time and joining us on the programme. We now move on, and US officials have held talks with the Taliban administration in Kabul today over Americans detained in Afghanistan. Adam Boehler, Trump administration's special envoy for hostage response, and Zalmay Khalilzad, a former US special envoy for Afghanistan, met with the Taliban's foreign minister, Amir Muttaqi. According to a statement given by the Afghan Foreign Ministry, both parties have emphasized that talks must continue on various current and future issues in bilateral relations, particularly regarding citizens imprisoned in each other's countries. Meanwhile, Washington has not spared any immediate response on the meeting as of now. But reports say that Mahood Habibi, a not naturalized US citizen, is among the Americans held in Afghanistan, but the Taliban has denied holding him. Mahood Habibi was an American businessman who worked for a Kabul-based telecommunications firm and was arrested in Afghanistan in August of 2022. Earlier in June this year, the US Department of State's RFJ program offered a $5 million reward for obtaining information regarding his location, recovery and safe return. We are now joined by, we are talking about these negotiations between the Taliban government in Afghanistan and two US envoys. The Taliban, of course, which took over, back over Afghanistan in 2021 after a disastrous withdrawal from the Biden administration. Scenes from Kabul. And now two US envoys, Adam Boehler and Zalmay Khalilzad, are in rare talks in the Afghani capital. We're going to find out a little bit more about Washington's objectives here and their engagement with the Taliban. We're now joined by Matthew Vadum, who's an American journalist, and he joins us live from Washington, D.C. Matthew, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. Matthew, what do you make of these two special envoys going and visiting the Taliban? Is this a refreshment in bilateral relations between the Taliban government and the US government?
I don't think it means that the Trump administration is going to suddenly recognize the Taliban, but I think that they see an opening here to free American hostages that are being held by the Taliban, and they have to do this very carefully because the U.S. government doesn't recognize the Taliban, so they have to tread very carefully while doing this, so as not to create the impression that the U.S. is granting the Taliban government legitimacy. At the same time, they recognize that these people have Americans in their custody, and they want to get them back. So, you know, this is a difficult job for diplomats to negotiate with a hostile foreign power that basically the entire world doesn't recognize. So they're doing a delicate diplomatic dance here, trying to get the American hostages out. And you know, if it works, it's probably not going to work right away, because the Taliban lies and stalls and drags things out for years sometimes. So, you know, the Trump administration is at least making an effort here, I would say.
Yes, and of course it comes after after that disastrous 2021 withdrawal from the Biden administration. You join us from Washington, D.C., Matthew. Do you see any appetite there for a limited re-engagement with the Taliban? We know that they do want recognition, while the U.S. is pushing for release of these detained Americans. Do you think this is strictly a hostage negotiation or part of a wider engagement strategy here?
I think that this is what you could call an ad hoc thing. They're doing this just to get the hostages out. I don't think that the Trump administration is particularly interested in building bridges to a regime that no one considers to be legitimate, and that everyone, just about everyone, is repulsed by because of its abhorrent treatment of its citizens, including women, and you know, the brutal totalitarianism of the Taliban regime. So I would be surprised if the Trump administration were trying to expand its relationship with the Taliban. I think that the relationship, the contacts that you're seeing right now, are just related to freeing the hostages. You know, but you never know where these things are going to go, and perhaps they could lead to something more. But I haven't seen any indication that that is the case, at least not yet.
Okay, Matthew, do stay with us. We have more updates in regard to the United States, where Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has criticised the domestic left-wing opposition on Saturday for downplaying the cold-blooded murder of US conservative activist Charlie Kirk. Meloni, leader of Italy's right-wing government, accused her political opponents of hypocrisy, saying they have often accused her of spreading hatred while remaining silent for justifying the killing of Kirk, who was shot while speaking at an outdoor event in Utah Valley. Kirk, a close ally of US President Donald Trump, was killed by a single bullet. Trump called the shooting a heinous assassination. The killing has sparked outrage among Kirk's supporters and widespread denunciations of political violence across party lines and internationally. Speaking at a party conference of her centrist ally, Meloni warned that the political climate in Italy is becoming unsustainable due to rising political hatred. She called on the Italian left to be held accountable and accused an intellectual of downplaying the murder of the right-wing politician. This is what the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has said.
Politica stanno tornando drammaticamente una realtà, facendo venire molti nodi al pettine. Io vengo da una comunità politica che è spesso stata accusata ingiustamente di diffondere odio, che è stata accusata, guarda un po', dagli stessi che oggi tacciono, minimizzano o addirittura giustificano o festeggiano l'omicidio premeditato, intenzionale, a sangue freddo di un ragazzo di 31 anni che aveva la colpa di difendere con coraggio le... Ci sono persone a cui è legittimo sparare in base alle loro idee, o a cui è meno grave sparare sempre perché non condividiamo le loro idee, o a cui è comunque comprensibile che venga voglia di sparare in base alle sue idee, significa che noi dovremmo immaginare pene inferiori per chi spara a un esponente di destra, magari prevedendo come attenuante il fatto che le sue idee... Sia arrivato il momento di chiedere conto alla sinistra italiana di questo continuo minimizzare o addirittura di questo continuo giustificazionismo della criminalizzazione, della violenza nei confronti di chi non la pensa come loro, perché il clima anche qui in Italia sta diventando insostenibile ed è ora di denunciarlo ed è ora di dire chiaramente che queste tesi sono impresentabili, pericolose, irresponsabili e antitetiche a qualsiasi embrione di democrazia.
We are now once again joined by Matthew Vadum. Matthew, Prime Minister Meloni says Italy's left is downplaying the cold-blooded murder of Charlie Kirk. Those are her statements. Why do you think that this US tragedy is being drawn so sharply, not into just Italian politics, but into world politics?
Well, I suspect, in terms of the framing of the story, the story is ripe for amplification. This was an attractive young man, 31, with children and a lovely wife, who was viewed by many as a heroic figure. Who was crusading, for lack of a better term, for a better America. And he wasn't a strident, brutal figure, which, President Trump has often been accused of being. He was actually a gentle, he could fight back, but he was a gentle figure who was very gracious in confronting people who disagreed with me, especially in his question and answer sessions on college and university campuses across America. This is somebody that people can relate to. They can understand and empathize with him. They liked him, and he was a very important figure. Some have said, and I think there's some truth to it, that without Charlie Kirk's advocacy of President Trump in 2024, President Trump could not have been reelected in 2024, that it just wouldn't have happened because Charlie Kirk was a decisive figure in swinging over young people to vote for President Trump. And so, the combination of this being, it's like he was out of central casting from Hollywood, to use an expression. He was a handsome figure who was likable and who people could relate to. And then he was cut down. He was murdered. He was martyred in the prime of life on camera. We've all seen the gruesome footage of him being hit in the neck and the blood spraying out. And this is a powerful thing that has affected a lot of people. However, there are people on the so-called far left and even the not so far left that have been, dancing in the streets, so to speak, about the death of Charlie Kirk, because he is their enemy. He represents everything they don't support. He was a strong conservative Christian leader. He was against wokeness and political correctness, and he spoke for a lot of people who are part of what could be called a silent majority in the United States. And so he is the enemy of the left, and so they are not all of them. People like California Governor Gavin Newsom condemned the assassination, as did, a lot of prominent Democratic Party leaders. But this is someone that the left really hates, and they hate him. They detested him because he was effective in getting his side's message out. They don't just focus their anger on people who say things they disagree with. Like Sean Hannity, conservative radio and TV talk show host in the United States. They may not like him, or they may not have liked Rush Limbaugh, the late radio TV host, but Rush Limbaugh wasn't a political figure who got things done. Charlie Kirk got things done, and that made him a threat, and that made him an object of disgust and hatred to people on the left. I think that's a good summing up of it.
Yes, thank you very much, Matthew, for joining us here on the programme. Thank you for taking the time. We now move on and over to the Middle East, where in Gaza City's Ramal neighbourhood, Palestinians are coping with extensive destruction as Israeli forces escalate their assault ahead of a planned offensive targeting the urban centre. Late-night evacuation warnings forced residents, including families with children and elderly, to flee just minutes before powerful missile strikes hit the area. The attacks caused widespread damage, destroying tents, vehicles and multiple buildings, leaving many homes in ruins. Evacuating to the south remains a significant challenge due to high costs for transportation and shelter, with many displaced families unable to afford the steep expenses amid dwindling resources. This is what the displaced Palestinians had to say.
كمان على خان يونس ومش عارفين ايش من نعمة حياتنا كلها نزوح وتشريد ومعانا مرضى ومش عارفين وين نروح واي مكان امن مش عارفين. مش مقاومة مستهدفة، احنا مستهدفين، احنا كمدنيين احنا مستهدفين. احنا ايش ذنبنا؟ احنا كشيوخ كنساء كاطفال ايش ذنبهم؟ الحرب صار واصل فيه لا يقل الشهداء عن 70.
Now, thousands of Palestinians have been seen travelling southwards along the Al-Rashid coastal road in the central Gaza Strip on trucks and donkey-pulled carts, fleeing Israeli military strikes in Gaza City and northern areas. Displaced families are heading towards Khan Yunis and other southern locations, but face uncertainty and a lack of safe zones. Many are carrying patients and vulnerable individuals struggling to find shelter amid the chaos. Civilians, including women, children and the elderly, have expressed fear and frustration, saying they are being targeted despite not being involved in the conflict. The ongoing violence has resulted in nearly 70,000 deaths since the war began. Let's in fact listen in to what some of the local residents and displaced Palestinians had to say.
الساعة 11 الليل واحنا نايمين والاطفال نايمين والمسنين الكبار نايمين اتفاجئنا الا واحد بصوب هجوا ايش قال لي بلغونا تخلب يمكن 5 دقائق او 4 دقائق على السريع طلعنا نجري اتفاجئنا طلعنا بعد ما روحنا من النزوح هذا وجينا على المخيم يعني لقينا المخيم دمار بركان صفي زي ما انت شايف السيارات مدمرات الخيام مدمرات الحياة مدمرات ومش عارفين ايش نعمل الحين وبنشكي احنا لربنا بس مش للعبد. وين نطلع على الجنوب؟ اليوم الجنوب مصيبة كبير، وين نطلع للجنوب؟ اليوم السيارة بدها 1000 دولار تنقل أغراضك، 4000 شيكل و3000 شيكل، الخيم اليوم حقها الخيمة حقها 1000 دولار كمان. قاموا الخيم وقاموا مصارينا وحرقوا قلوبنا وحرقوا حياتنا وما ضلش حاجة لنا.
المربع كله عليه نقطة حمراء، اخلوها. المهم اخذنا المنطقة اللي اجت الضرب هذا في مبنى عندنا صغير في العمارة. وانضربنا بس يعني ضربوه بشكل يعني صاروخ كبير يعني مش زنانه ولا اباتشي لا يعني حابين يضرروا المنطقه كلها لانه جو الصاروخ يعني هز المنطقه فضرروا حوالي 4 عماير في المنطقه مش بس احنا ولا من وين يروح الناس؟ الناس اليوم عمل الخلاف بقول لك ما تروحش لهان ولا هان كله على الجنوب يا عمي بعيش الجنوب اليوم الناس هي من وين تجيب مصاري؟ هي المشكله اليوم الناس لا هي مطلوبه لليهود ولا شيء بقول لك انا من وين اجيب مصاري بدي 4000 شيكل للخيم عشان هيك بدي غصب عنهم بضلوا هين قاعدين والله يا عمي قاعدين قلة حيلة.
Now, Gazans in Gaza City have inspected their belongings and stood surrounded by rubble following an Israeli strike on an UNRWA-run school that was sheltering displaced Gazans. They say that the Israeli army warned them to evacuate ahead of time. However, many of them lost their belongings under the rubble. Israel has intensified Gaza City strikes as many residents refuse evacuation, hitting 3 UNRWA-run schools which are used as shelters for displaced people. Israel has stated its intention to take full control of the ruined city, where about 1 million people are sheltering. Let's listen in to some more statements of Gazans fleeing from Israeli strikes.
ايش اللي صار؟ حسبي الله ضربونا واحنا قاعدين ضربونا ضربوا المدرسة اللي قويتنا حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل حسبي الله وين نروح يا عالم وين نروح يا ناس وين نروح احنا امانة خلاص بقفي يما خلاص بقفي حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل فيكم حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل وين احنا نروح وين ناخذ لاولادنا نلاقي ليش اخذنا يعني في خيمة احنا يعني في خيمة زمزم ولا فرشة ولا حرام ولا مخدة وين اخذ لاولادي وين اخذ لاولادنا وين اقعد فيهم قاعدين نتفزع قاعدين بعجن للاولاد بتطعميهم ولا بقول له اخلوا المدرسة اخذنا حنا وحطينا اغراضنا برا بعد شوي ولا مطاب وقصف في المدرسة ما اخذناش احنا الا وعينا هي اواعينا قاعدين في خيمة مش ملاقيها تاخذ لاولادي لا فرشة ولا حرام ولا مخدة ولا شيء انا في الشارع انا واولادي وين اروح
طالع لو تنطبق السما على الارض مش طالعين ولكم لناش مكان ولكم معناش شكل نركب كيف نطلع ولك قل مواصله بدها 3000 4000 شيكل والارض بيجروا لنا اياها اجار ولكم من وين نطلع.
Now we finish in the Indian subcontinent, where Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said that the newly appointed Nepali Prime Minister Shikula Karki will pave the way for peace, stability and prosperity in the country, following the Gen Z protests that toppled the earlier Oli government last week. He has congratulated Sushila on becoming the first woman Prime Minister of Nepal and said that her appointment is a shining example of women empowerment. Shikila Karki is an anti-corruption activist and Nepal's first women Chief Justice. She was chosen by student groups who have been protesting over corruption and curbs on freedom of expression. Well, that is all that we have time for, but we will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world.